Greetings and a warm welcome to the Australia-China Media Watch podcast. This is a special episode dedicated to unpacking a book that has been published by the Australian Strategic Policy Institute. So this book first came to my attention via my Twitter feed, and if you're on Twitter, a little bit about ASPI. They are the Australian Strategic Policy Institute, an independent, non-partisan think tank focusing on Australia's defence, cyber, technological and strategic policy. So the tweet that caught my eye is this ASPI's new report, Taking the Low Road. The authors explore the changing nature and influence of CCP engagement with civil society across Australia's states and territories. Now this really caught my attention because it's so easy to paint Australia with a single brushstroke, but Australian society and culture is far more nuanced than that because after all, this is a country the size of a continent. So the post was also repeated in their Facebook page, and just for reference, this is the ASPI's Facebook page with 26,000 followers, and the post reads as follows. In a new ASPI publication, Taking the Low Road, authors explore the changing nature of CCP engagement with Australian civil society across Australia's states and territories. The report offers policy recommendations for all levels of government to counter unwanted influence. An accompanying graphic comes along with the post with a quote from Professor John Fitzgerald, and it says, quote, "We draw insights from experience for managing risks into the future and assisting other countries wishing to maintain their sovereignty, preserve their integrity and practice their democratic ways of life consistent with maintaining productive relations with China." Let's find out a little bit more about the Australian Strategic Policy Institute. This was found on their website. The ASPI is an independent, non-partisan think tank that produces expert and timely advice for Australian and global leaders. ASPI generates new ideas for policymakers, allowing them to make better informed decisions. ASPI is one of the most authoritative and widely quoted contributors to public discussion of strategic policy issues in the Indo-Pacific region, and a recognized and authoritative Australian voice in international discussion on strategic, national security, cyber, technology, and foreign interference issues. In terms of the ASPI's background, they were established by the Australian government in the year 2001 and is partially funded by the Department of Defence, with other sources of revenue including sponsorship, commissioned tasks, and event registration fees. Details of the funding sources are available in a site that is provided. And details about its funding: the ASPI is a wholly owned Commonwealth company formed in 2001 as an independent, non-partisan think tank. They receive funding from Australian and overseas governments, industry and civil society groups for sponsorship, research and project support. ASPI remains independent in the context of their research and in all editorial judgments, and they employ a rigorous internal and external peer review process. In terms of their funding breakdown, it looks like 37% comes from the Department of Defence, 25% comes in from federal government agencies, 18% comes in from overseas government policies, that's close to a fifth, 7% from the private sector, 4% from state and territory government agencies, 3% from defence industries, 1% from civil society and universities, and 5% other streams of income. Let's take a closer look at the articles and publications themselves. First up, appearing on the ASPI.org website, .org.au website, is the following headline. Published 15th of February 2022, the headline reads, Taking the Low Road, China's Influence in Australian States and Territories. Written by John Fitzgerald. The article can be summarized as follows. In November 2020, that is a key date of concern, a Chinese official passed a list of 14 grievances to Aussie journalists. Many of these concerns highlighted Australian attempts to limit Chinese engagement with the states and territories. China has made covert attempts to influence some politicians and overt attempts to engage states, territories, and institutions in ways that challenge federal government prerogatives. So the study methods in this book, according to Professor Fitzgerald, will potentially become a model for similar research in many parts of the world. Understanding the nature of Chinese engagement with subnational jurisdictions is an important way, according to Professor Fitzgerald, for national governments to shape their security policies and to resist covert and indeed unwanted and overt interference. The book provides original insights into the scale of the challenge and distills practical policy recommendations for governments at all levels to consider and adopt. The article in question, appearing on the ASPI.org.au website, is accompanied by a 1 hour and 5 minute long webinar which is available on YouTube with closed captions. We'll move along to unpack the article even further, and there is an expanded version of the article that's found in the Strategist, belonging to the Australian Strategic Policy Institute. A little bit more about the Strategist. The Strategist is the commentary and analysis site of the ASPI, an independent, non-partisan think tank based in Canberra. ASPI is one of the most authoritative and widely quoted contributors to public discussion of strategic policy issues in Australia, and a recognized and authoritative Australian voice in international discussion of strategic issues, especially in the Asia Pacific. Moving along, the Strategist aims to provide fresh ideas on Australia's critical defence and strategic policy choices, as well as encourage and facilitate discussion and debate among the strategic or strategy community and Australian public. A disclaimer and caveat placed over here: the views expressed on the Strategist are those of the individual authors and don't represent the view of ASPI or the institutions to which the authors are attached. Now that we've taken the step to unpack the background, let's hop into the article itself. If I could summarize the paragraphs, the opening paragraph is about Xi Jinping's rise to power, and ever since, China has begun leveraging sub-national partnerships with Australian states and territory governments. Some of these partnerships were contrary to Australia's national interests, and local universities, business associations, and community groups became entangled in public debates about national security, institutional integrity, and social cohesion. The next paragraph talks about how Taking the Low Road is the most comprehensive study ever undertaken into Australia's relationship with China outside the national level, which once again is the reason why my interest was so piqued. Most of the time when it comes to studying the relations between these two countries, they are at the national level, so to have this kind of nuanced look, I think, is particularly interesting and worthy of further investigation. Moving along, the paragraph talks about how the publication examines state and territorial linkages with China from the relatively innocent days of the 1980s and 1990s through to fraught times under Xi. The authors look at economic, political, and regional issues, as well as local and regional business networks. So it seems the case that the aim of the report is to chart new rules of engagement for navigating what is known as the paradox of para-diplomacy with China. Moving along to the fourth paragraph. I think what the paragraph is trying to say is that the more distant local actors are from having to worry about national security or national interests, the greater the opportunities for open dialogue, cooperation, and trust. Local relations and people-to-people ties with foreign countries familiarize communities with one another, cultivate business and investment networks, and build broad understanding and trust through myriad points of connection. The next paragraph looks at how this is particularly true in the new era of Xi Jinping as a dominant force in China's political and economic sphere of influence. Following up from that, the next paragraph looks at how China's pervasive united front operations carry risks that aren't widely appreciated at the local level. Digital diplomacy requires a level playing field supported by an open internet, again, not met in China. In Australia's relations with China, the benefits of diaspora diplomacy are difficult to realize when immigrant communities fear reprisals. Alongside that, people-to-people ties, diaspora diplomacy, and subnational government-to-government relations are important fields of play. Advances in technology and digital communications and large-scale migration have all expanded opportunities for para-diplomacy, and new roles emerged for local, state, and city governments to aggregate individual and grassroots initiatives. The article moves on to unpack how Australia's relations with China are rapidly running dry, and there may be a need to help replenish the reservoir of goodwill. Opinion polling in Australia and China indicates that 4 decades of goodwill built up through business, cultural, and people-to-people ties is disappearing fast. And there are a number of recommendations in the publications, apologies for that, for practitioners to help get local relations back on track. Maintaining that relationship requires coordinated, coherent, and resilient systems for managing relations. All Australians need to be clear-headed about their values and interests and be prepared to defend them when necessary. To further unpack the publication, Professor John Fitzgerald is the editor of Taking the Low Road, China's Influence on Australian States and Territories, published by the ASPI. John Fitzgerald is the Emeritus Professor in the Centre of Social Impact at Swinburne University of Technology in Melbourne. His latest book is Cater Country: How China Became the Chinese Communist Party. In the ASPI website, the entire publication has been made available in PDF format, and this is what it looks like. 328 pages in length. The link to the publication will be provided in the YouTube description down below. It'll probably take me a little bit of time to read through this publication. I look forward to updating you with my findings as well as summary and hopefully some analyses of the publication at a later stage. Thank you so much for tuning in to this special episode of the Australia-China Media Watch podcast. This is the ACMW signing off for today. Thank you very much indeed.